We'll talk about managing corporate research tools in academia.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly LaVoice, and I am the director of the Management Library at Vanderbilt University. And I'm very briefly going to talk to you today about something that takes up a lot of my time and energy, and that is figuring out solutions to manage corporate research tools that we've acquired in academia and specifically in academic libraries. So here's our roadmap for this session. First, I want to talk about why these tools are increasingly becoming subscriptions that libraries are asked to maintain. I'm going to highlight 3 of the common challenges that we have supporting these tools in our operating environments. And then I'm going to share some very practical suggestions that we've implemented for workflows to figure out how to, with the current staff allotment that we have and resources we have, manage these tools that do not work in a similar way to many of our other subscriptions. Most of my experience is with business, and that's going to be where I draw examples from. But if you work with different databases from a legal perspective, biomedical, sometimes science and engineering, the principles are very similar. So our faculty here rely on real-time market data in the classroom as well as for their research. When you think about how things shift with real time, for example, stock prices or commodities, there isn't really a market for an aggregator to take that information and create a separate product just designed for academia the way they could with something like market reports or articles. Data providers are often selling an identical platform to corporate clients, which could be investment banks or law firms, as well as academic clients, which could be colleges or departments themselves or libraries. There really isn't a financial incentive for them to develop separate products for us in academia, which can be challenging. Sometimes we're lucky and you do get an academic rep who at least understands more about how we operate, but sometimes we do not. The information needs can be really similar between a student or faculty member doing business research in an academic context as they could be for somebody at a corporation doing their job. But the elements of how we use the tools and manage the product life cycles can be really, really different. I also want to drive home the point that it's not just content that matters, format matters. So students being exposed to these platforms when they're working on their degrees in higher education, it truly is training them for the workforce, and it gives them that competitive edge when they're interviewing to say they already know how to use these platforms that they'll then use in the workforce. So I'm not going to talk a lot today about how we negotiate the prices for these tools because that's a whole nother 15-minute process. So let's just assume that the vendor has identified a price that you feel comfortable with and you're ready to start a subscription. This is the time where we run into the challenges about how do we actually have these products in academia. So these 3 broad areas, I'm going to talk first about challenges and then go through some solutions for each of them, how we handle account management, how we handle access and authentication, and how we handle download limits. So for account management, most of the tools, I had some examples of vendor names on the first slide, but I don't want to focus too much on individual vendors because a lot of this is really similar. They often require individual accounts that use university email addresses. This is often manual work for us to audit these accounts because anyone with a university email account can put that through. At my institution, alumni keep their email addresses, so it is really a nightmare for us. Vendors are used to working in corporate environments where if you're no longer an employee, your email address is terminated, and they really struggle with the idea that there are people who might have academic email addresses that you don't want using their product. Often with these products, you are not able to purchase accounts for campus-wide access. For example, one of these products starts at 50 seats. So if you only have 50 accounts, how do you figure out an equitable way to distribute these accounts and also change them out as people have different requests? This goes really hand in hand, but along with creating and maintaining those accounts and figuring out who should have them, how we actually provide access and authentication. A lot of these providers have 2 options for using their platform. They have a web-based platform and an installed software on the computer. Sometimes both of these only work in PC environments, which is frustrating for those of us who know we have students who are Mac users. And the installed version is often required to use all of the features. So if anyone wants to do any kind of modeling with a built-in Excel plugin, they're going to need the desktop version. Once again, our students own their own computers. We don't own those computers. So if they're installing software and then they're logging in with their individual accounts, they're not going through any kind of proxy. We're not verifying their identities in any way. There has been a lot of talk this year about people actually buying and selling university credentials on the dark web because of how valuable these particular products are. So it can be really nerve-wracking when we're trying to do an honest job upholding terms of use to make sure we know exactly who's using our platforms when we don't have any control over their computers and we're not able to put them through the proxies that we use for so many resources when we can really carefully filter out who's using what. We do have a few vendors who are open to working with IP access, but the majority of the vendors that I work with for these financial platforms will not work with IP access. Lastly, I want to talk about downloading limits. A lot of our different tools have these. We are used to that. Increasingly, we're being told to purchase new products or separate products to increase the download limits. But for these platforms, it can be really tricky because the limit can vary by type of data point. So it's often very confusing to users because it's not clear why they could download, for example, 100 records for one type of information, but only 20 from another. The limits are not explicitly articulated within the platform, so sometimes you get a notification that you hit your limit, but you're not actually sure why. There can be buttons that pop up that say, click here for more downloads. They're not designed for us. They're designed for corporate clients or self-paying clients, and then we'll send the student down a rabbit hole for something that we're just not able to accommodate there. You can see here, these are two screenshots of download limits from two of these platforms that I'm talking about. The one platform, you can't even view results, let alone down results. What it's not saying, it's saying you have more than 15,000, please add filters, but you can actually only download 199 at a time, and that's nowhere explicitly put here. And then for the one below, it does say that you have 10 remaining downloads. However, it doesn't say when that limit resets or why you have that particular limit. I want to really drive home that download limits hinder academic research, and it's really important for us to continue to have these conversations with vendors. These vendors are very protective because this intellectual property has real value. This information is a commodity, and we're getting tremendous discounts often to be able to offer these platforms. But at the same time, if we can't use them to their full potential, then they're not really suiting our academic needs. So here are some of the solutions at my institution that our acquisitions team alongside the subject librarians have kind of worked together to figure out what's going to work for us and how we're going to distribute different workloads. So we have some products where we do automatic domain approval. So anyone with our institution's email address can automatically create an account, but we set them all to expire in May on a specific date of that year. This ensures all graduating students are removed. We put the registration page behind a proxy, so in theory, that is something we can kind of control, even though they still do have those email addresses. This can be disruptive in a sense because if you are a sophomore and your account's deleted, you have to recreate it every year. But it saves us time compared to manually doing an audit of every user. You can also ask vendors if there is a way on registration pages, whether you control them or the vendor does, if you can create categories for students where you can either tag them for the year that they're in or just a classification for undergraduate versus graduate. That way, if you were doing these purges, there might be a way to just purge undergraduates and not graduates and faculty who are doing long-term research projects. Sometimes there is not an option to do that. We have other products where once or twice a year we'll commit to doing an audit. It seems like a lot of work, but it takes a lot less time than manually approving every individual account that comes in. It does require good communication with the vendors to ensure that if you're sending along these records, they're purging it. And it also is a way to ensure that any faculty members or people you know that are doing long-term research, that those accounts don't get purged. Finally, I do have colleagues at other institutions I have worked out who have very few accounts and they need to do manual account approval. And in this case, it's really about clarifying that this is a physical workload for staff. This is not automated, and there is time a user might have to wait. So for example, having very clearly on your page, all accounts are approved Monday. So in theory, if someone submits an account Wednesday, there's clear expectation that unfortunately, they don't get approved until the next week because that is part of a workflow. We've been able to use student workers to help with products like this. They have had to do compliance training, which is something our university requires. But once again, it's a great way to save staff time if you already have student workers who have some downtime, whether they're sitting at a service desk or something else. For some of the solutions for access and authentication, we're about 50-50 with this one, but we do have some vendors who have been willing to create lab access for us. And we've had this to kind of offset waiting periods for individual accounts and also to really securely know exactly who people are because they have to log into our computers with their current credentials, which alumni could not do, and then get onto the particular platforms. And this allows us to limit it to just the IP range of those specific computers. Some institutions will do reservable time slots to kind of equitably distribute these accounts. Let's say you have 10 accounts for a particular system. That way students can plan in advance and they can plan to physically come in and use that. This also ensures that those Mac users can complete their assignments, even if they can't do it remotely and Windows users can, we're still getting them access. I've also worked really closely to do outreach to faculty if we do need to prioritize accounts because we have a limited number of seats. So a lot of these platforms will let you do bulk class registration. So if a faculty member sends you an Excel sheet, you could bulk put that in. You can also be upfront with the faculty member and say, hey, your class takes up half of our total accounts. Is it fair to say students can have 2 weeks to complete their assignment? And then I'm telling you ahead of time, we will purge these because we do need to have accounts available for students who come in. If your institution does not give alumni email addresses, I am so jealous and happy for you, but that's something you should confirm with them because all of these accounts are still email-based. And then finally, we've been really promoting the web-based access over desktop access, even though our subscription fee includes both, just because we can put the web-based access behind a proxy and feel like it's a little bit more secure. And we've been really saving our advertising of those desktop features specifically for faculty or graduate students that we know have a legitimate reason for those extra features, just because we feel like that way we're doing a better job at kind of honoring our ability to control who's in that platform. Lastly, for downloading limits, I think communicating and explaining why is really helpful. So much of this content is coming from third parties, whether that is coming from companies themselves, credit unions, exchanges, and they have a lot of fears that you're going to take all of this very expensive information and create your own product. Some of these platforms will offer us a certain number of faculty accounts that have no download limits or much larger download limits, and we have the ability to kind of share those between faculty. It's important to have a really fair way for people to apply to those. I have had some vendors say that graduate students don't count, but then colleagues who have that same subscription at different institutions say, oh no, my contract allows for that. So I think being really upfront when you're negotiating that to say graduate students are doing in-depth project and we want to be able to share our set number of accounts that we are funding between graduate students or faculty and kind of working that in. I also will say to consider tools that include a free API option or sandbox environment. Some of these tools do require you to pay more for it, but surprisingly, a few of them do have it included in the base price. This is a walled garden approach. So if you've used ProQuest TDM Studio, a similar type of concept where you can analyze information on the platform, millions of records that you couldn't export, but you have to stay within the platform itself and use their tools. So sometimes faculty can find that a bit frustrating, but it is a way that has no additional charge for them to be able to do their analysis. This particular tool, they offer 1-hour webinars all the time about how to use this. So it's been really helpful to tell our faculty members, you can learn exactly how this works for you. And if you still have questions after that, they do give us the support to follow up. So it might not be your traditional workflow measure, but at the end of the day, you're still able to do the research that you want to do. So in conclusion, a lot of these professional tools were not designed for academics. They weren't designed for libraries, but with some creativity and additional work, we can utilize them securely. My two tips to take away: put that vendor to work. Ask for custom options. Ask at the contract. Ask for how they can help you with your solution, what they can do as far as security. And you might be surprised at what they offer for you, whether that's creating you a custom registration page. They might even give you additional accounts if you can articulate why you might need that lab environment. And then finally, use your professional network. There's not a ton of documentation about these, but what I like to do is do a search for the name of a database and LibGuide and build a list of institutions who have it, and then reach out to people I know there. And most of the times they are very happy to share their workflows that then we've been able to work from. So thank you all today. I think we have time later for questions, but also here is my contact information. If you ever had a question about a business tool or something that seems like a corporate tool, I'm always happy to chat with people about solutions that might work for them. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelly. We'll do questions after Megan's presentation. Megan, feel free to share your slides. Our next session is Mind the Gap, Expectations versus Reality in Electronic Resources Management Skill Set.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So thank you and welcome. My name is Meghan Lenahan. I'm the Electronic Resources Librarian at Binghamton University. And my presentation is Mind the Gap, Expectations versus Reality in Electronic Resources Management Skill Set. So the agenda is just quick outline. We'll do a quick introduction about my background, touch upon the NASIG Core Competencies, and how it applies to job postings, as well as library school curricula. And I will share my IRB survey findings. So a little bit about myself. I've worked in libraries since undergrad. I started out as a student library assistant, and since then I've worked in academic, public, and law libraries. I got my MLIS degree in 2011. I got my first librarian role in 2019, and my first role as an E-Resources Librarian in 2023. So starting out as an E-Resources Librarian and just trying to learn the job, a question that came up often was, how do electronic resource librarians learn their jobs? The first place that I was directed to when I started was the NASIG Core Competencies for Electronic Resource Librarians. As you see here, we have the E-resource life cycle, and then the different core competencies, as most of you probably already know. And I took those core competencies and looked at job descriptions for E-resource librarian jobs that were posted from February 2023 to August 2025. And then applying those core competencies, almost all of the e-resource management jobs were looking for an understanding of the e-resource lifecycle and licensing, as well as assessment using usage statistics for collection development, effective internal and external communication for vendor relationships. Some of those positions may have supervised staff, and personal qualities such as problem solving for troubleshooting purposes. And I also looked at what was publicly available for library school data based on what was available from ALA accredited library schools. The top concentrations and specializations I found at the 65 different accredited library schools, archives and records management was the top specialization with 38 schools, followed by school media specialist or school librarianship at 33, youth services, including children's and young adult services at 23, academic libraries at 22, public libraries at 21, and finally, general librarianship at 11. But what about e-resources management? Out of the 65 ALA accredited schools, only 9 offered a course on e-resources management. And even then, it wasn't offered on a regular basis, whether it was a special topic or if it was a summer course. And due to lack of data, I couldn't find if they were still being offered at the school. And when they were covered, it included topics such as licensing, vendor relations, acquisitions, and quote unquote trends. Topics may be briefly covered in other courses such as collection development and tech services. So that revised my original question. How do e-resource librarians learn their jobs if not in library school? In the summer of 2024, I conducted an IRB survey. So thank you for those that have participated in this survey. I had a total of 141 respondents, 125 willing to be quoted in my research. I've asked questions about education, training in their current roles, and advice they would give to future e-resource managers. The following slides are going to show the top 5 responses from some of the questions that were asked. So for formal training, I asked if you have an MLIS degree, did you take any courses on or related to e-resources management? The top answer, 21 respondents took a non-degree course about e-resource management. Some other courses that they took in library school included cataloging, databases, collection development, and metadata. Please share what kind of on-the-job training you may have received that was relevant for your current role. So this is kind of a two-parter. The first slide is asking what type of training the respondents received. So 77 respondents took webinars to get their training. 33 respondents received in-house training at their jobs. A tie between literature, such as articles or books on the topic, or learning on their own independently. And finally, attending conferences such as this one. And then I looked at who provided on-the-job training to the respondents. The most common response was they received training from a coworker in their department, followed by their supervisor. If they were lucky, they received training from their predecessor, and a few people said they received outside training outside of their libraries, such as a consortia or vendor training. I asked about what skills they had wished to learn to better prepare for their job. Most common answer was licensing. 21 responded that they wanted a better understanding of the process for licensing and like how to look for red flags in licensing. 16 respondents wanted to know more about computer coding, whether it was HTML, CSS, or actual programming languages such as Python and R. A tie at 14 responses wanted to know more about authentication and negotiation skills. And finally, a better understanding of systems. Then I asked what advice they would give future e-resource managers. 25 respondents recommended being adaptable to change, whether it's internally, externally, technology-wise. 20 respondents spoke about collaboration. I found that this is a very collaborative field. A willingness to learn. I constantly feel like I'm learning on the job every day. Learning new technology, which is important, whether it's database changes or platform changes or migrating to a new library management system. And then finally, having problem-solving skills, particularly for troubleshooting. And then finally, I asked what recommendations they would make to current MLIS programs to help better prepare future librarians for a role in e-resources management. 29 respondents said they should offer a course in electronic resources management. 23 said they should cover more about the licensing process from a librarian standpoint. 16 respondents recommended more hands-on experience rather than theoretical knowledge. 15 respondents recommended covering the e-resources life cycle. And then finally, 11 respondents talked about coding, either HTML, Python, etc. So after doing this survey, I learned that this is a profession where you kind of have to be proactive in your learning. And on-the-job training is critical, as well as professional development and networking. And while some e-resource librarians may be working on their own, they're the only ones doing the job, it's also a collaborative field, and you can reach out to other e-resource librarians. Personnel qualities matter just as much as experience. So having those troubleshooting, problem-solving skills, those interpersonal skills when talking to external vendors are just as important as knowing the e-resources life cycle. Core competencies through NASIG's core competencies may be hidden in other coursework such as collection management. And a lot of these skills are transferable from other areas of librarianship, which I've learned taking on this role. And that is the end of my presentation. So thank you for attending.
Thank you, Megan. So if folks have questions for Kelly or Megan, please chime in using the Q&A button. I've seen a couple in chat. Perhaps I could start with that. James asked, did you measure how many ERL positions are entry level? And I believe that one's for Megan.
That I didn't ask, but some of the job descriptions I originally looked at were non-MLIS positions. They were paraprofessional positions. But that didn't make up a majority of the responses or the job descriptions that I looked at.
We've got a thank you for the presenters. Other questions?
Susan has her hand raised.
I know I have to always ask a question in person. It's one of those duties as assigned things that I have. But as I was typing away in the chat, trying to relate some of the points from both of your positions or presentations, excuse me, to the vision speaker. And Kelly, what you were describing of like individually managing alumni accounts and doing some other things that seemed like a lot of really hands-on work. Again, for some of us, that would definitely come up in the capacity, like capacity mapping or capacity inventory. Also at like my public state university, alumni can't no longer keep their emails because it's a big security issue. So just that's obviously very different than elsewhere. And Megan, you and I have corresponded in the past, and the thing of about like learning how to do electronic resources when you're as old as I am and there were no such things in the beginning, you just kind of like fell into it. However, I did, as I put in the chat, apply print. And I really believe this truly, that if, especially a lot of places talked about staff that have been there a long time, knew things about print, there's a lot of parallels. The US Postal Service was our thing. Well, now we have the internet and IPs and all of those. But the other point I wanted to make was the continuous learning. And I think you brought up a little bit of that in your survey responses, but there, since in so many libraries, for budget reasons, you often don't have the overlap of positions, and e-resources is often kind of a loner, even though it shouldn't be. It's still like a really difficult thing to just say, oh, I learned it. You have to go out and continue to refresh your skills. There's always new things coming along. 5 years ago was AI in our future. And even though the previous session had someone talk about how AI can help us, I think most of us are a little like wary. I'm sorry, I've gone like beyond a lot, but nonetheless, I did appreciate, and I think both of what you talked about relates to the vision speaker about, again, really looking at what are the important things, and what do we need. And it could be, Kelly, that your business school, it was a priority and they were willing to maybe help you out in various ways, but not all of us, have that. Our business school is also very busy, and we do get a lot of really weird things for them, as well as the medical school, as well as the law school, as well as our architecture school. So we all have our things. And thank you for your presentation.
Thanks, Susan. Related to some of the questions you sent back, and I think, Kelly, you answered one already out there, asking how many or how closely you work with your EARLs, and you said you have 4 electronic resources librarians. Anna asked a good question related to your user management. So she's asking, do you have some recommended tools or software for keeping up with the user management and the business resource tools?
That is a really great question. So for we are very lucky. We actually, when I started, had 2 e-resources librarians, and that number has doubled. And I think a lot of that comes from having a really wonderful manager in that unit who's really advocated for that we need more people in these roles. But the bulk of this is actually done by the liaisons, even with 4 librarians in that space. I mean, they simply couldn't do all of that. So it becomes a question of kind of priorities and figuring that out. But we do need to work really closely to make all of this happen. So for recommended tools to keep up with it, it really depends. We use a lot of spreadsheets, and that's worked really well. A lot of these platforms will let you bulk upload accounts and also delete accounts. So we like to keep those there. When we do have student workers also working on projects, it's nice to be able to have a spreadsheet in the box folder that we can all go back and forth for. A lot of these products will not send pretty counter compliant usage stats or anything like that. So we don't really have to work about incorporating that in, but I will say that one of the biggest blessings for us has been that we are allowed to have student workers, even though this is kind of sensitive information. They just have to do university compliance training. And I think without that piece, we would not be able to do all of this. And they know way more about Excel than I do. And they will teach me new formulas and tricks all of the time that have been really helpful.
Great, thank you. We've got another question, this time for Megan. The responsibilities that fall under e-resources management vary from library to library. What are some of the key skills you think should be the baseline coming out of grad school? Or is this really more of a learn on the job role based on specific job needs?
That's a great question. I think a lot of the basics of it is on the job learning, because each library has different workflows. But I think having those personal qualities such as problem solving and being willing to try different things to see how it works and just having like those interpersonal skills, I think are important to have like coming out of library school. It is good to kind of have that background in um like the technical side of it, but I know some people had mentioned having a background in like computer coding, which I do not have, and my job fortunately doesn't deal a lot with the the web page design for my library. But I think the more interpersonal skills are important, and the rest of it can be taught. And I think making those connections with other librarians in the field is also valuable.
Great, thanks, Megan. We've got another. And this one's from James. It says, did you measure the types of experiences of those surveyed, like had cataloging, acquisitions, and serials prior to taking their ERL role?
I didn't really ask too much about like their background unless they volunteered that information. So that might be in like individual answers. I did ask like what their current job titles are to kind of get a sense of like if it's just more broadly covering tech services or if they're specifically doing e-resources.
We are getting chattier as the afternoon is going on. Megan, I've got another question. Are you going to publish the results of the survey? And that one's from Susan.
I would very much like to, and I just got to figure out a good way to do that.
All right, and it looks like I've got another question for you, Megan. You indicated that you need to make adjustments as an ERL. Were there expectations adjustments that were there expectation adjustments that library administration needed to make?
That's another good question. Do you mean like the library administration overall or like departmental adjustments?
Feel free, Binghamton University, if you want to put that in the chat or a Q&A. Oh, departmental, they said.
Okay. So when I was hired, they understood that I didn't have a robust background in e-resource management. So they're taking a chance on me when they hired me, but I guess seeing how I've worked previously doing general tech services, seeing that I could transfer those skills into this role. And it was a newish kind of role. It kind of was born from uh, a, an additional need in the library. So it was just kind of like creating the role as I went, which was another added challenge. Yes, and I agree, Deja. It took me just as long to understand the terminology, and that's why I have an acronyms and abbreviations list.
We've got time for perhaps one short question that remains. Otherwise, we'll move into another break. Okay. Seeing no other questions. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Megan. We've got a 10-minute break, so we'll resume at 30 after the hour for our final long session of the day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.